Azure Striker Gunvolt 3. I played this game. If you know, I've been talking about playing this game for like, I don't know, basically before its release. I was like, I need to get around to that. And then I never actually got around to it until now. And I found out apparently this game has a poor reputation for some reason. I'm not really sure why. That's not being dismissive. I just haven't looked into it. But yeah, I mean, if you're familiar with the Gunvolt series, it's a very like 2D action platformer kind of thing with a big focus on, I'd say, speed and comboing a lot of times too, where you're kind of like trying to chain attacks together and things like that. And Gunvolt 3, like kind of the previous games in the franchise that were sequels, they feature multiple characters. This game features a new character called Kieran, which is basically like a sword-wielding, I don't know, I think she calls herself a battle priestess kind of thing, right? And you can also play as Gunvolt in this game, though, but he's more of like a super-powered character versus Gunvolt 2, where he's like a separate campaign. So I played through the entire game basically as Kieran, or whatever her name is. And she's an interesting character. I think the big thing with Gunvolt is like, how do each of these characters function? And, or how do these characters function and how do they play differently? And I think at the end of the day, though, every character is really focused on moving fast overall. At least that's my personal understanding of how these games work. And so while Gunvolt and Copen before kind of focused on tagging an enemy and then kind of destroying them from afar, Kieran is about tagging an enemy and then getting up right on close to them and then killing them that way. And there's kind of a few different ways you can do that. There's like a melee combo that you have that you can throw it and then and slash into them, or you can also throw your talisman into them and then just like dash into and do damage. Most of the time, your talisman, one or two of your talisman will kill enemies, but the more you tag an enemy with your talisman, the more damage you'll do when you do that jump slice kind of thing. So I think this game requires a lot more precision than the past Gunvolt games because it is a lot more about basically staying in the air. Like basically Gunvolt games are all super easy video games. You can get through them no problem. But the challenge comes in is how you score. And a big part of this game, scoring wise, is staying in the air, making sure you're tagging stuff and keeping moving. And then as you go through, hitting something else so you get launched through the air again and you tag another thing and go. It's way harder than you'd expect if you're a new player. So I think it is very much a practice makes perfect kind of thing in a way that past Gunvolt games I don't think has had nearly as much as an emphasis on. But overall, it's still a very fast-feeling game. You can dash through the levels, and again, since it's so easy, you can kind of make it as fast or slow that you want it to be. Just a matter of, are you going to get a good score or not, is kind of up to how well you master the mechanics kind of thing. I think the mechanics of this game are really solid. It just doesn't necessarily add anything to the series. I think it is just like kind of a variation on what has already been done. And I think if you are a long-term Gunvolt player, you'll appreciate the kind of additional depth to how Kieran moves and how Kieran combos specifically and the challenge that comes with that personally. So it's got a variety of stage themes, but overall I think there are more visual differences. I think one problem that Gunvolt games have always had is like, how do we differentiate these stages, because so much of the game is focused on how the character moves. I don't think Gunvolt 3 really solved that problem. So I think what Gunvolt 3 to me does that stands out the most, besides just adding a new character, is how basically the story progresses a little bit. Well, maybe not how it progresses, but like your interactions with different characters in the story. So this game takes a very like Mighty Number 9 approach. What I mean by that is when you go and defeat at least the earliest bosses in the game, instead of them just dying and giving you like a new ability, in this game you do get new abilities as well, just not as like themed as like a Mega Man. You gain an allyship with the boss basically, and they come work for your company basically. It's kind of silly, but it is like a fun concept where like you beat up this boss and then he comes and he's like sitting next to you in the cubicle kind of thing. It's a cute idea. I think the whole thing with like how this game works from like the characters interacting is generally overall pretty cute. Gunvolt, for whatever reason, you know, I know why, but without getting into it, he's a dog in this game, so they play a lot around with like the idea that like Gunvolt can't do a lot of things he used to because he's a dog. So it's like, why don't we do a puzzle together? He's like, I don't know how to puzzle with dog paws kind of thing. So there's a lot of cute things like that, and all the characters I think are very much in the way that Gunvolt games are, like these very hyper like stereotypical version of the character. You get like this brawny meathead guy who lifts weights, and his whole thing is, you know, how can I work workouts into the office and stuff like that, right? yeah, this little, like, I don't know, nerdy kid who actually wants to be kind of manly and reliable. He probably wants to be more reliable, but I think, you know, the manliness stuff kind of comes out of that. And then you have like the goofy guy who talks in a bunch of slang, and like this is not like this stuff is Gunvolt has a lot of characters and a lot of characters like this, so you'll feel at home with this. But I think what this game does really well is it makes these characters feel a lot more engaged in the core narrative. And so, you know, these characters that you have recruited are helping you solve problems in terms of the narrative of the story, right? I do wish they had a little bit more of a presence on screen at times. So there's a few levels towards the back half where a lot of these characters will theoretically be on the same stage as you, and occasionally they'll kind of show up, but they're mostly kind of portrayed in dialogue. They're kind of telling you what's happening to them rather than them showing to you what's happening. And this is kind of what Gunvolt likes to do, is that like when you're playing a game, or when you're playing a stage, it likes to tell you a lot about the narrative, even though the game's not really paced for that, because a lot of the narrative gets cut off if you like play the game too fast. But I think what the big thing is that, you know, it does kind of interconnect these characters into the story in a way that, like, I think past companions in the Gunvolt series maybe don't directly relate to what's happening in the stage as much. So these characters do have a presence. They just are a little bit more, I think, not as directly on screen as I would like them to be sometimes. They do show up occasionally. I'm not saying that they don't at all, but I just wish there was a little bit more there. The core narrative of the game, I think generally, and I think this might be where a lot of Gunvolt fans might have been upset about this game, if, like, again, not looking into it. And I think this is true of all Gunvolt games to some extent, with maybe the exception of some of the spin-offs. Narratively, it just doesn't really do much in terms of, like, where the story's going from the past. You know, it's been a long time since I've played Gunvolt 2, right? I played Gunvolt 1 when it came out. I played Gunvolt 2 when that came out. And I think Gunvolt 2 came out in like 2016, so it's been almost 10 years since I've played Gunvolt 2. So, like, narratively, where Gunvolt's at in his journey, I don't really know, and I feel like the developers kind of try to account for that by just, like, they kind of give you a little lowdown on what Gunvolt is, but I think they also just kind of disconnect Gunvolt from whatever he was struggling with at that time. It doesn't mean it's not a part of the story, but it just isn't really the focus of the story, right? This other thing is happening now, and we're going to tell you about what happened to the Gunvolt in the past through this other thing, but we're not going to kind of directly address those things. And I think what ends up happening through that is a lot more gaps in the narrative because of that. I don't mind that so much because I'm very much more of a character-focused person, but even as somebody who doesn't care about that stuff as much, I think it was very apparent to me that this game seems like it just doesn't really engage all that much with what was happening in the past games at all. So story-wise, I just think it might be a little unfulfilling overall. But, you know, I think this is a good game overall, though. I think if somebody said this is like the worst Gunvolt game they've played, I would say, oh, gosh, sure, maybe. But it is, like, very slightly, like, I think it really depends on what you want. Like, is this a game that's more challenging for me, a casual player who's not trying to get a high score? Sure. Like, it doesn't flow as well as the past games because the character design is, again, like I said, a lot more precise, I think, in terms of how you control them. But I think part of that comes with an understanding that the players playing this game have been invested for a while. And so, you know, making a character that I think generally kind of fits in with somebody who has a understanding of how these game mechanics work over this period of time, I think makes a lot of sense. I do kind of feel like Gunvolt has more or less run its course. I mean, I could maybe have said that beforehand. I think there is a general sentiment that the Gunvolt series overextended itself because they only had 3 mainline games, but they also had 2 spin-offs, X and X2. And I really like X1, and I think X2 also has some really cool things about it. I think I did a review on it, but I don't remember what I said of it, honestly. I do remember liking both games overall, but it does kind of feel like this game is just like another one of those. But, you know, when you think about people who are fans of the Mega Man franchise and this game has its roots in Mega Man, you know, that might be just something that fan base expects. For me, somebody like me who wants something new, I think if they made another Gunvolt game after this, I'd have to really see some big change for me to ever get interested in again. But, you know, I just think it's a really cool game overall. Or maybe I should say it's a really solid game overall. I think it is just like, it has its purpose. I think the character itself plays well. It's just nothing particularly new for me personally. So